Treaty of Versailles, Great Economic Depression. So, as we have discussed in the previous classes about the Second World War and the First World War, what were the consequences and what it all has happened. And as such, because of the world wars, we can see now there is an outcome of First World War, which is called as the Treaty of Versailles. So the First World War, which was commenced on the 1914, that has came up onto the end in the 1918, and this was the very long and the very bloodiest revolution you can see in the history. So major of the countries has participated in this war, and there were 5 more years that were required to complete all the general settlements. So in 1919, as to have a general peace settlement, Allied powers they have conducted the Treaty of Versailles with the Germany on June 28th and Treaty of Saint Germain with Austria it September 10th and the Treaty of Neuilly with Bulgaria on November 27th. So in 1920 we see Treaty of Trianon with Hungary on June 20 on June 20 sorry not June 24th on June 4th. So it was not until this July 23rd. So in 1923, the final peace treaty with Turkey was signed at Lausanne, and that treaty has came into force on August 6th, 1924. Okay. So the importance of this Treaty of Versailles was the peaceful settlement, and they wanted to arrange the map of Europe by recognizing the principle of war, principle of national determination. So under this principle of national determination, we see the new nation states has created for the first time, and we see the sovereign states were recognized under this. So the treaty has recognized all of the fundamental principles of international laws here. The most result of this treaty was the creation of League of Nations. So further, this League of Nations has lost its significance as well, we can say. So the another was the Paris Peace Conference that was opened on 18th January 1919. So the representatives of these nations were they attended the conference of this, and representation to this conference was not given by Germany, Austria, Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria. So all the leading Allied powers, like Great Britain, it was represented by Lloyd George, France by Clemenceau, and USA by President Woodrow Wilson, and Italy by Orlando. All these people have represented their countries, and that's how these countries are known as Big Four for several months. They made all this big force has made the big force FOUR force. So all this force has made the principal decisions here. So after that, this has led to Orlando has left Paris of his differences with Wilson. So this was again carried out by the big three. So there were a lot of differences in their character as well. And if we see the basis of as such, the World War has caused lots of consequences, and it was important for the world to keep the peacemaking here. So, on the basis of peacemaking, Woodrow Wilson has proposed 14 points. So, the 14 points here, if we see, that was announced on 8th January 1918. So, it was these principles which has gave expression for the lasting peace among the sacred nations, if we see. The 14 points are open convenance of peace, whatever they are speaking at the meetings, they have to be openly arrived, and there should be freedom of the seas. People have every country has their seas in around their boundaries. So the sea will be used. This sea comes under, for example, you see the Arabian Sea comes under Indian territory as well, and into the Arabian territory as well, and there is Bay of Bengal. Likewise, there are other seas that comes under the territories. So that should be a freedom of seas, and then there is the freedom of international trade, reduction of national arrangements to the lowest point, consistent with the national security, and a very justified colonial policy, and the evacuation of Russian territory, and they should leave Russia free to determine its political development. and evacuation and restoration of Belgium territories, because that's how they have captured those territories, and they made the war in those days. So the evacuation of invaded French territory and the restoration of Alsace and Lorraine to France. All these things we have learned in the World War chapter. So the autonomous development for the people of Austria and Hungary is another point. And the foreign troops to be withdrawn from the Romania, Serbia, and the Montenegro. So then the next is the sovereign rights of Turkish Sultan that has to be restored. Next is the independent Poland to be free and secure. And then there is a general association of nations that has to be very well established here. So if we see um, these these were open at these were the convenants that were happening, that they could not open freely, that could not openly arrive here. So and here also, if we see, the League of Nations has also failed to have its political independence to all the states. So if we see, the 14 points definitely have influenced the Paris Peace Settlement. And because of this due influence, this League of Nations, it has drafted and placed its framework, the working of the Treaty of Versailles and the principle of self-determination. It was properly applied for the first time where volatile in the case of Saar, Rhineland and Danzig, with the creation of new states like Poland and Czechoslovakia and Finland. So the attitude of these allies towards the defeated nations were largely modified on the principle of Woodrow Wilson only. Then there were secret treaties. Under the secret treaties during the course of First World War, if we see, that were concluded between the different states here, and that has got an opportunity. So sometimes very same territory to a number of themselves, it was not that impossible for having an implementation. So at the time of peacekeeping, there were secret treaties that has given a partial recognition for the defeated nations, we can see. And then there comes the Bolshevik Revolution in the USSR. So the communist revolution that has happened in the USSR has influenced the Paris Peace Conference, and the Allies believed that this Germany can resist the influence and expansion of socialist Russia. So on May 7th, we see on May 7th, 1919, this treaty was presented to German delegation, and within 3 weeks given time for written objections. On May 29th, with a very great voluminous objections has been received from the Germans. So this treaty covered 20 to 30 large printed pages, and the German reply occupied 443 pages, we can see. And as the Allies has demanded unconditional acceptance of the treaty, and the Germans had no alternative way to go. So what did they do? They have to append their signatures to the treaty on June 28th, 1919. And then there was national interest of big powers like USA, UK, France, and Italy. They were so much deeply involved in terms of peace here. As we see that USA has no territorial interest, main aim was the US was to secure the economic advantage everywhere in the world. If we see, USA is a largely capitalist economy. It wants to secure its power economically everywhere. So the UK also was wanted to expand its own empire and collect the raw material for their industries from the abroad. And the main aim was of France was to establish the French supremacy in Europe and to keep this Germans weak in every aspect, in every respect. While Italy, it was wanted to broaden its territories that was populated where the people, whoever are the Italians here. So it has greatly influenced the Adriatic here. And yeah. Mm, So if we see, there are few provisions of Treaty of Versailles. There is territorial provisions, economic provisions, military provisions, legal provisions, political provisions. And within these provisions, in the territorial provisions, this Treaty of Versailles has given documenting 440 articles. So under that, we see the territorial provisions, where France has recovered the Alsace and Belgium got back Eupen and Malmedy. We see the Denmark received the northern part of Schleswig, and Germany lost Polish speaking districts. Most of them were the Posen and East Prussia. The Saar Valley was formed into an area under the control of International Commission and the League. And we see the Memel was ceded to the Principal Alice, and that was handed over to the Lithuania in 1924. A small bit of Upper Silesia was ceded to the Czechoslovakia, and under 80 of the treaty, Germany acknowledged and undertook strictly to respect the independence of Austria. So Danzig also given away Germany to set a free city under the League of Nations. So Poland was given special rights in the city of Danzig. So these are the few territorial provisions, and under the economic provisions, Germany had to accept war guilt, and it was the responsible, and where Germany has to keep up its responsibility for causing the world war here. So the Allied armies were to occupy the left bank of the Rhine until the terms of treaty were carried out here. So under the military provisions, if we see, the treaty has also made an attempt to cripple one for all the military strength of the Germany, and the Germany was removed from the eastern bank of the Rhine, and number of cannons, battleships were also reduced, and German forts in Heligoland and Dune, all those were demolished, and the number of German navy as well was reduced, if we see, and it was also forbidden to make purchase from the outside tanks, harsh and poisonous gases. So then there comes the legal provisions. As Germany has to hold up its responsible for war guilt, Kaiser William II, the Emperor of Germany, is accused of as the chief criminal, we can say. So where his trial was not possible, as Poland has refused to surrender the Kaiser to the Allies, so the Germany has to surrender other persons accused of committed acts in the violation of laws and the customs of war. So, with the political provisions, if you see, the main objective of maintaining international peace, and I would say it has provided for the International Labour Organization, and with the Brest-Lit was was concluded between the Germany and Russia, as the other treaties has been concluded, and Germany had to withdraw her army in the eastern and the new frontiers, the new territories, whatever it has occupied, it has to bring back their army. So the independence of Belgium, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia was recognized here. So the treaties, critical estimate, if we see, the treaty has dictated peace, but what happened? It was a treaty imposed by the victors upon the defeated nations. The next was the peace settlement was a spirit of revenge. We can see this kind of attitude was one of the part of this victorious nations, and that victorious nations were not in response to give the particular peace. And again, the treaty that has imposed unjust economic and colonial terms to cripple Germany economically. So as a result, only we see that Germany had to wage a war in the Second World War. So, and even Winston Churchill here felt that the economic causes were malignant and silly. Next critical aspect was the Treaty of Versailles has to conflict a struggle between three conflicting ideals: high idealism of Vincent, nationalism of Clemenceau, and the opportunism of Lloyd George. So all these three were the big three, we can say. So there was a clash of interest between the Great Britain, France, rivalry leadership between the USA and the Great Britain, commercial struggle between the USA and Japan can be easily seen here. So, according to some of the critics, this Treaty of Versailles was a breach of faith, and the promises given to the Germany was not fulfilled based upon the Wilson's 14 points as well, and there were a lot of moral defects of the Treaty of Versailles. So the treaty contained a lot of seeds of Second World War, if we see, because Germany was made war guilt here on the one hand, so it was very harsh with the Germany was very harsh here. So it was deprived of her colonies as well as all the interest and trading privileges outside her boundary. As soon Germany has attempted to abrogate the humiliating treaty unilaterally, another world war has started here. So then there are few treaties with other central powers, which is the Treaty of Saint Germain in 1919, Treaty of Prayan in 1920, Treaty of Neuilly 1919, Treaty of Sèvres 1920. These are the other treaties here we can see. And after these treaties, there comes the Great Economic Depression. As because of the war deaths, it was a very much important consequence of the Treaty of Versailles that has happened in the course of time. And where we see that decade after 1929 is called as the economic depression here. So the depression of 1929 to 31 was so much bad that has led to the closure of lot of industries, unemployment. We can see the millions of people in America and the Europe where they have become very poor here. So the world in the mid 20s had some reason for hopefulness. We can see the nature of this economic depression was one was boom and optimism, which is an economic stability and the hope here. So the Locarno period was having these tensions between the Germany and France, but uh, it has produced a half of the decade. If we see, it was having a little prosperity and stability, and goods produced by new industries were exported in exchange for imports from the abroad. We see, but the trade and industry with countries that has prospered growth in internal trade as well. So this period has saw a lot of mass production of manufactured goods, livelier methods of salesmanship, and high pressure advertising, growth of new industries with mobile automobiles, radios, and all. And the center boom was the United States of America, where the age of abundance of very much of goods and products was seen to be have been arrived for the first time. Thanks to a lot of production, many types of articles like cars, refrigerator, radios were able to get it at cheap prices, even for the common people in that day. So then there was a shrinkage of world trade, and US lavishly has lent money abroad and repayment of war debts and wished to sell its surplus products, more of the products at the cheaper rates here. So only two ways were left for other countries to either repay their debts or to get the imported products from the US here. So to pay in goods and services, it was not possible due to there were high taxes on them, high US taxes on them, and to pay in gold this was the only alternative option that has left to the countries. And in fact, they have repaid till the gold. Their own sources has ran dry in this thing. Money has flowed from USA into Germany for reconstruction purposes and facilitating payment of repatriation. So the USA again used this money for lending. So this process went on repeating itself. It was going again like a cycle here. So as a result, political and economic stability realized during the Locarno period was destroyed eventually. Then the crash of 1929. So the first sector was the economic decline in the agricultural sector in America and Canada. Scientific methods that were enabled the agricultural sector produced in abundance led to a fall in the agricultural prices from 1926 if we see. So the Northern American farmers, the Australian fruit and meat growers, Brazilian coffee growers, and the sugar planters in Java, they found world prices depressively very much low here. So the real crash came up with the American stock market here. So in that where we see the world price, where we see the companies shares were these were brought and that was sold by the people and that were collapsed on 29th October. Okay. So 29th October 1929. So as a result of this declining profits, many investors they had to invest less in the starting or the expanding business in the industry. So this was called as the Great Crash of Wall Street. We can see in the New York City and where the American stock market is been situated. Okay, the crash of 1929 went to ruin lot of growers of wheat, cotton, coffee, cocoa, sugar, and meat everywhere in the world. And we see with the Wall Street crash, the economic growth was clearly visible in Europe, where that has quickly began to vanish here. So one after another, countries fell into economic difficulties, which in turn led to internal political changes in this countries. Can see. So the causes of economic depression was the economic crisis as a result of First World War and the rapid industrialization that has takes place during the war to meet their requirements. Next was the problem of repatriation and the inter-allied debts that was very much serious. Next was the after World War, most of the European nations they remained directly or indirectly as the debtors to the. They had a lot of debts that has to be repaid to the US here. So this debts began to pay this debtor. Debtor is nothing but the person who owns the debt, which means the person who has taken the loan here. So they began to pay their debts here, we can see they began to pay their debts to America in the gold. So with the scarcity of the gold, the agriculture of Western Europe has been suffered, and the prices of wheat unexpectedly has been fell. And the agricultural production in the Australia, New Zealand, Argentina has been increased in excess so much because they have to get their domestic needs due to the mechanization of the agriculture. Next cause was the during the war, manpower was needed for the armed forces and defense purposes. And during the war, most of the European countries they resorted to the mechanism of industries on scientific basis. Next was the rapid growth of industries in some parts during the war here and the reconstruction of industrial sector after the war, we can see. And then there is economic nationalism that has become a new feature of Europe after the First World War. So every country tried to become economically self-sufficient here because they had a lot, very losses. So each country wanted to reduce their imports and increase the exports here. So highly industrialized countries like USA, Britain, they found it difficult to find markets for the products here. So then there was a poor moratorium. Moratorium is nothing but where we say the Great Depression has got a greatest financial humbled all those greatest financial powers of the world. So 5,000 American banks were closed in 3 years, and America has stopped lending money abroad and began to withdraw short-term loans as well. So all foreign capital was withdrawn from the Germany. So the situation was so serious that the President Hoover of the United States had to come on a proposal on June 20, 1931, postponing for 1 year of all payments on the debts, and where this offer came to be known as Hoover moratorium. The situation has caused Hoover to came up with a proposal here, which is called as the Hoover moratorium here. So the main points here, if we see, all the intergovernmental payments has to be suspended for 1 year, postponement dues to be paid in 10 installments, assistance was to be given to the smaller countries, assurance was given by Germany that money saved due to the moratorium used by for only economic purposes only, not military here. This was the moratorium, Hoover moratorium points here. So then consequences of economic depression was the economic political um, consequences if we see. So in the economic consequences, all the unemployment figures that has been rose and near starvation situated developed in certain quarters. Millions of people have suffered financial losses. Factory owners lost their sources of income. And we see United States was forced to introduce state interference in economic, particularly the New Deal policy initiated by President Roosevelt. Political consequences, if we see, the most of the European countries were affected by the crisis, and their people had to undergo unprecedented sufferings here. And it was believed that this liberal democracy and capitalism was the best route for the economic development. So, democracy was an experiment in Germany. We can see the US isolationism has destroyed their capacity to defend the weaker nations, and also Japan's aggression over the Manchuria in 1931 was the major shock to the League in its 12-year history. In fact, Japan's defense of the League marked the beginning of dissolution of international body here. And then there is multidimensional crisis in different countries that has been happened. Like in United States, the New Deal program has launched with several welfare measures to protect the employed and the poor to facilitate the recovery. And it was hit by the depression, and they, as agriculture had to receive a severe setback, they had to take several measures to meet the situation. So they came up with the New Deal program. Next comes the Great Britain also. It was a victim of economic crisis in the middle of the 1931 with the international trade coming to an halt, because Britain, if we see, they are very good with the merchant trade and everything. So the merchant navy was severely hit here. In the France was playing an important role in European politics as a result of depression. The repatriation receipts were stopped suddenly. So after 1933, economic crisis has begun to subsidize everywhere. In Germany, the situation was they have to pay million of dollars as reparation. So the depression of 1929 made the situation more worse and ruined the Germany economy. And in the Austria, it was the Central European victim of the crisis. Simultaneously, emergence of authoritarian dictatorship was special during this period. If we see, and the Nazi Party, having close connections with the German Nazis, adopted all types of tactics, including the elections on the one hand and violence on the other, and the murder on the other. If we see, and then there is Soviet Russia. So the first 5-year plan, which was launched in 1928, was declared to have fulfilled its target only in 4 years, that is by 1932. So it reorganized large sectors of industry, doubling the industrial production here. The Soviet Russia, however, benefited in a different way, but the hostility of Europe towards the Soviet was forgotten in Europe's efforts. Though there were countries, many countries in Europe were appreciated Soviet state planning a cure for the sickness of capitalism. And there was Italy and other parts of the world has been um, hit with the depression here. So these were the Treaty of Versailles were not drafted on the basis of justice, and solely they were the consequences of it. And out of that, there was a Great Depression. And after that Great Depression, we have seen the Hoover Moratorium. And after that Hoover Moratorium, they were the multidimensional countries who were hit by the Great Depression, is what we have learned in this chapter here. So now we will see what is League of Nations here. So by the end of 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there was a frequency of wars and the discovery of more destructive weapons, statesmen, everything has concerned about the everything in the way, the violations, all the chaos around the world has made an establishment for the peace here. So in 1905, Sir Henry Campbell has proposed the creation of a League of Peace. So in 1911, Sir Edward Grey has emphasized the need for establishing some sort of concern of nations. So in August 19, Pope Benedict 15 had pleaded for settlement of international disputes instead of war here. So in June 1915, an organization called this League of Enforced Peace has formed in America. So in England, Lord Bryce, Fillmore, and Smuts greatly supported this idea of world organization. And if we see that was where President Wilson has also announced his historic 14-point program in January 1918. And the General Association of Nations has been formed under specific contents, if you see. So there was a proposal made by Woodrow Wilson at Paris Peace Conference, set up under his chairmanship with 19 members commission. So in February 1919, the commission has prepared the draft for this covenant and constitution. So this covenant has actually was signed and uh, came up into force on January 10th, 1920. So there were 26 articles in the League of Covenant here. So headquarters were located at Geneva in Switzerland. Aims and objectives of the League of Nations are they have to promote the international cooperation to achieve international peace and security, and they have to accept the following. They have to accept it to follow certain obligations like in reduction of national armaments to the lowest point, interchange full and frank information on the scale of their armaments, respect and preserve their territorial integrity. And the signatory states, whoever has signed as a member of that, they have to pledge to maintain world peace and security through international cooperation. And in Article 10 of the League Covenant, it was agreed that in any case, if there is a conflict between two or more nations, they would accept League's mediation and they will not resort to arms during the period shown of their commitment. But last not the least, if we see the League objectives is to promote international cooperation in economic, health, educational, and cultural fields. Okay. So this has to be promoted at the maximum here. And then there comes the membership of a League of Nations. In the membership of League of Nations, if we see, there are rules in the admission. New members required a two-third vote of assembly. And before entering to them, the members has to required give their prescribed guarantee in respect of international obligations. So the main organs of the League of Nations are the assembly, the council, the secretariat here, and the assembly is the representative organ and the political and representative organ here. And the functions of the assembly it has to see the admission of new members, annual election of non-permanent members, approval of addition of members to the council, approval of the council's nomination, and joint election with the council of the judges and all. And the council here has to be designed as a small body to serve as executive organ. So there are five permanent members: USA, UK, France, Italy, and German, and there are four non-permanent members. So due to its failure of USA to join the League of Nations, it has stayed at eight in the initial stages. So this council was expected to at least meet once in a year. Yes. So the functions of this council is to um yeah. Then they under the functions of formulation of plans for disarmament, supervising the administration for the mandates under the convenant here. So then there is secretariat. So this is a permanent secretariat headed by Secretary General at Geneva. And then there are functions of the secretariat. Under the functions of secretariat, we are having coordinating the different activities, keeping the records of League of Agencies, furnishing, showing the necessary information to different organs, and the registration of treaties and international engagements, whoever has entered into the members here, and the permanent court of international justice, which provided in the Article 14 of the League Covenant, can be entrusted to this as a responsibility, formulating the plans for the establishment of a permanent court justice, we can see. And then there is International Labor Organization. Main objective is to promote international peace to promotion of social justice here. So this can be realized through the regulation of working hours, labor supply, prevention of unemployment, providing adequate living wages, everything here. So the nature of League of Nations depends upon the voluntary cooperation of its members, how they are showing up their decisions. And the members of the league, they have to agree to restrict their freedom in certain cases so that they could preserve their international cooperation, world peace and security. And as Heimer, he has rightly said that organized a family of nations here. So the activities of League of Nations, if we say, um, the League of Nations has only existed for only 20 years. So in this 20 years, it has successfully settled the disputes relating to the smaller states. As a result, if you see one serious defect here was the no effective machinery to enforce its decisions. So as a result of this defect, they could not restrict Hitler, and it also failed to stop Japan's invasion over Manchuria and Italy's aggression over Abyssinia, we can see, and it has left no future for UNO as a legacy of novel experience in the matters of education and culture and improvement of transport and health through international cooperation. So this league has also solved the problems of resettlement of refugees by coordinating various governments, charitable institutions. So if we see in the words of Langsam, the concept of an association of nations was old. The actuality of League of Nations was new here. For the causes for the League of Nations was the covenant was incorporated in the peace treaties, and as a result, they refused to ratify the treaties were automatically has debarred from membership. They came out of the membership. There was a lack of understanding in the ideals, objectives. So different nations used the league for the furtherance of their own ends to meet their own ends. There was a lack of cooperation. Big powers, Russia and Germany, were not admitted into long time. Defective voting system as well, because this was unanimous agreement created a lot of troubles in the matters of taking decisions, lack of power to execute its own decisions because it did not independent force to effectively deal with the states threatening the peace and security in the world. So there was a revengeful attitude of the vanquished, and there was a lack of international spirit because no member of the league was prepared to have a national interest for the sake of greater international interests, and there is a failure in achieving disarmament. And another was the economic nationalism. So the economic depression, the Great Depression, which is also called as, and that has occurred from 1929 to 31, was so severe that the um, political and economic system, it began to collapse everywhere. And every state has begun a tariff war. Everybody wanted to improve their more of their exports, reduce their imports. So they were into the tariff war, and the international trade has also shrank here. And the economic crisis led to the rise of fascism in Italy, Nazism in Germany, and authoritarianism in Japan, everywhere. So, in spite of lot of shortcomings, this League of Nations had no doubt it been a very great experiment, we can say. So if we see this League of Nations has came into existence on 10th January 1920, and where the Treaty of Versailles came after the First World War, and about 2 decades, 1920 to 1939, it was merged with the UNO, United Nations Organization, in 1946 after the Second World War. In these 2 decades, they were able to have the severe political disputes that were arising from the First World onwards. Okay, so if we see, they were in, we have also learned that there was an establishment of international organization to avoid wars, and there was a Woodrow Wilson's historic 14-point program during the First World War, and that we see the League of Nations has created as a part of Treaty of Versailles, which was established its headquarters in Geneva, which is there in Switzerland in 1920, to make with two aims. Okay, then this has only existed, this League of Nations has only existed for 20 years only. Okay, so there were various factors has been contributed for the failure of League of Nations, and this has included where the incorporation of League of Nations into the Treaty of Versailles. There was a lack of cooperation from the major powers as well, lack of military power at its disposal and all. So it did, though it has failed to ensure peace and security, but it has done a lot of good work in social, economic, and humanitarian fields here. So this is what here today's interstate and Treaty of Versailles and the League of Nations here. I'm done with today's class. Thank you for joining.